Remember that cricket is a funny game. 100 years before we protected our heads, players looked after their groin. So don't be as stupid as old cricketers. Protect your computer. NordVPN is the protection I use when facing cyber short balls or when the rights issue tried to dismiss me. NordVPN will help you get through the straight bat of any GEO blocks so you can watch all the cricket you want. If you need your pitch changed, well, NordVPN can doctor any surface to a new location so your IP address is set up for you to win. Want to buy an associate cricket shirt from a place that won't ship to your country? Select NordVPN. Want to watch a game on a free stream in another hemisphere? Give NordVPN the ball. Or if you just want to watch a clip on social media that the cricket board won't allow, promote NordVPN to pinch it. So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects their nether region with NordVPN today. Welcome to Wagon Wheel. I am Jarrod Kimber, and this is the Cricket Show where we answer your questions on the sport. Big thanks to everyone who's already got their questions in on Patreon and beforehand. So remember, patreon.com, Jarrod Kimber, /Jarrod Kimber. I should know the address for this. If you want to sign up, and you can ask questions ahead of time, like quite a few people have today. Yeah, please, it's a great way of supporting us. Also, I don't know if everyone knows this, but if you go to goodareas.co, you can also find our website, which has, especially if on some of the videos you're like, it's really hard to follow these videos at the moment. You know, as in something comes up on the screen and you can't see what it is, or I move on too quickly, we want to see something else. We have all the graphics that we use on the videos on goodareas.co, so feel free to head over there as well. It's certainly another good place to find all this sort of stuff. But let's just start with the Patreon questions from today. And we start with Matt, who says, how much control do cricket boards have over centrally contracted bowlers? For example, they want to develop an old ball middle over seam bowler. Can they dictate to a domestic side to only bowl the player after 20 and 25 overs? They can. That team will probably... So I'm pretty sure I'm right with this. Cameron Green was offered to a bunch of county teams a few years ago to come and play cricket in the UK. And they said, but you can only have him as a batter. So if you want him to play, that's absolutely fine. You can sign him up, but he can only play as a batter. So sometimes those stipulations do happen. That doesn't usually happen for these other kinds of leagues. They are a little bit different. And to be honest, most teams, if you gave them a limiter on when you could use the bowler or how you wanted them to bowl, more often than not, the league would just... And with the Cameron Green, I don't know if he ended up signing that year, but I know a lot of teams were just like, we can't be bothered. We'll just go get someone else. So there is certainly an element of, if you make it hard for us, because think about this, if you're a team, whether you be a franchise or a first class team or whatever, if you're trying to win a game, to have a player in your side with limits or regulations just makes it harder, right? So you can ask, but it doesn't necessarily happen. I think that, and I've said this for a long time, that there should be people who work for the cricket boards whose job it is to actually work with the franchises and be like, coming into a season, like next year and the year after, saying to CPL general managers and coaches and things like that, what are you looking for? What kind of players are you looking for? Have you seen this player? Are you interested in this player? This is how we would like them to be used. Can we develop them? Is it possible for you to, get them extra training when they're in Trinidad so they're facing more spinners on turning wickets or whatever that may be, right? All those sorts of things. I think there should be people who work for cricket boards who do those jobs. It doesn't seem like it's a job that I'm aware of at the moment. And I do think there's a bit of a disconnect there. But in the heat of battle, when a team's winning, especially if you say to a player, like if Cameron Green was playing in a county season and like it had the chance of winning or losing a game and he needed to come on and bowl, he might just come on and bowl because that's what athletes do. So it's always hard to put those sorts of regulations on players. Will says, what do you think happens sooner? The next New Zealand victory over Australia in a test match or Ireland's first ever victory over England? It should be New Zealand over Australia, right? But probably won't be based on everything we know about those two teams. But, England should have already lost a test Ireland, right? But they're not going to play them all that much. I'm still going to go New Zealand victory over Australia in a test match. I mean, they've beaten them before, so it's not as big a deal. Will says, do you think they will ever add semi-finals to the World Test Championships? I think they struggle to have a final, if we're being honest, Will. I mean, they really do. It is not a perfect situation from that point of view of the way that it currently works is they've just found a window that allows everyone to be involved. I think adding semi-finals would be an extra complication. Obviously, if it was a real tournament and was done completely correctly, they would have it. I don't see it coming in the next little while. Things like that, like I see all these things. I think it might have been a Reddit post that someone sent me the other day about, or maybe it was Quora or whatever, but someone sent me a big thing of, how do we fix the World Test Championship? We could all fix it. I must get 1 or 2 people a week going, I've got a great way to fix the World Test Championship. The ICC know it needs to be fixed. It's just that all the ideas that most of us come up with don't fit within the schedule. That is why it is the way it's currently set up. Cam says, Elise Perry equals cricket's greatest winner. I suppose it has to be an Australian women's cricketer, probably, doesn't it? From that point of view. And then also winning the IPL, or the WIPL, the WPL, what are we calling it now? We got rid of Whipple, didn't we? WPL. Certainly is a big part of it, especially with RCB, considering their haunted past. Video on the main site to follow on that one. But yeah, I would have thought she just has the most trophies. So from that point of view, I don't even think it would be all that close. I'm trying to think of how many women's big bashes she might have won as well, and hundreds and things like that. But yeah, there was that point, of course, when Dan Christian was winning a trophy every 15 minutes. So he's probably got a few. But I would think of when we talk about major winners in the history of cricket, then Elise Perry probably has the most winners' medals. I'm not sure you get a medal for every single one. I think they get a medal for every single one. Mystic Referee says, short form cricket with multiple innings. What are the realistic issues with such a format, and why hasn't there been interest in trying it? It has been tried. It's really interesting that people don't know it was tried and it was terrible and everyone hated it. There was one-day games in Australia. So they were 45 over games, mid to late 2000s, 2008 to 2010, I want to say. They tried this. They split the innings in 2. So it was 20 overs in the first, and then it was 25 overs in the second. The biggest problem was, I remember watching a game where Aaron Finch was blocking out to the 20th over because Victoria had already lost a couple of wickets. It didn't work, right? Batters were not ready to change the way they thought. And also it was a one-day game. So you're not going to go as hard as possible for 20 overs anyway. And then you've got to get reset. And so people started slow when they came back out. I think if you were going to do it, let's say you did it in T20 cricket, and then you would have 5 overs, 5 overs, 5 overs, 5 overs. If you really want maximum entertainment, you can't have batters worrying about going out. So you can use, 6 batters in the first 5 over section, and 6 batters in the second, and 6 in the third, 6 in the fourth. And if they go out, they can come back in, or whatever. Because otherwise, you're going to have players playing for the break, because that's just a normal thing that cricketers do. And so what extra entertainment would we get here? There are ways of making it better, I think. And then you've got the players taking their pads off and everything, so you could have sub-fielders. You could also have I think it would be 5 overs from one end, 5 overs from the other end, 5 overs, and then 5 overs. I think that was the 100's biggest mistake. Just absolute idiocy to still keep, if with all the changes the 100 made, right? Oh, we want to make the game shorter. Just take out the gaps between the overs, right? Like, having people cross over at the end of the over and everything, just absolutely pointless, right? Wicket keepers in place. Let's go. Next bowler, give them the ball. So I think if you did it that way, but I still think that if you do it, you have to take away the 10 wicket part of it, where you only have 10 wickets to give. And that fundamentally changes cricket. And if you don't do that, you're then in a situation where you do it. But also, what's the advantage? Like, that's the thing I've never understood. Is it just that people understand who's in front more? Is that it? just it doesn't work for me. But I do think some of the reasons I think it works from a cricket point of view, if we're talking purely from a cricket point of view, is that if conditions are so important, great. Well, you bat for 5 overs, then they bat for 5 overs, and you bat. Then everyone bats and bowls with you, and everyone has the wicket when it's got a little bit more grass on it early on, or when it roughs up later. So there are some cricket reasons where I think you can make a solid point, but I think you have to change it so much that I don't really see it being an advantage overall. But 10 overs, 10 overs, 10 overs, 10 overs, 10 overs. Maybe then you only have one break. And over time, I would hope that the teams would stop playing towards the break. Although I don't think they would. I think batters would slow down around the 8th, 9th, 10th over, knowing that they want to be batting after the break because they have been trained with that since they were babies. No one knows this is a really long question. Guys, your questions are going to have to be a lot shorter than this. CricViz recently wrote a piece about Michael Holding where they said he took... versus England, he took 84 wickets and averaged 18.54 with a strike rate of 42 against right-handers, and took 12 wickets and averaged 39 with a strike rate of 83 against left-handers. I'm going to make an assumption that this probably applies to him versus left-handers from other teams as well. Yes, the only thing I would say there is it's 84 is a really good sample size, and 12 is far less. So that would be the first thing I would be worried about there. We know that bowlers and how many of the right-handers were tail-enders compared to how many left-handers were tail-enders. If you're going to, I'm just saying that if you're going to make a suggestion over someone's entire career. We know that bowlers from the past weren't as good versus left-handers pre-DRS, but averaging double is something I've never seen. No, I think it was pretty common back then. I think there was a lot of bowlers who were just really great against right-handers, and then you didn't have as many. You probably had one bowler in your team that you thought was pretty good against left-handers. So it's probably a lot more common than you thought. The left-handers, there's a lot more left-handers in the game now than there ever has been. There are whole teams who didn't produce left-handers, for long periods of time, right? So no, I can certainly see from that point of view that it makes sense. But I don't think that stops him being like a great player or anything, because I do think that was a quirk of the way that cricket was played at that point. The game was certainly, especially if you weren't an outswing bowler. So the guys who were natural outswing bowlers, they had an advantage against the left-handers because they could straighten the ball back up against them. And then if the ball didn't straighten up, it would go across. But probably for bowlers like Mikey Holding, who was probably banging the ball into the wicket, he maybe didn't get the LBWs bowled against the left-handers in the same way that he might have against the right-handers. And as you said, bowlers weren't bowling around the wicket to left-handers now. Like, I think if Mikey Holding bowled to left-handers now, I think with everything that we know of the game, he would dominate them. I don't think I shouldn't say he would dominate them. He would do great against them. I don't know if might still be better against right-handers, but I think he would be much better. So I do think there was definitely an issue with the way that cricket was beforehand. William says, if the ICC put you in charge of world tournaments, that would be funny. What would they look like? How often would they be? Which formats and how many countries? If the ICC put me in charge of world tournaments, I would separate all the 3 formats of cricket, which would be, that's the real answer you're looking for here, right? There should be a group that runs Test cricket, there should be a group that runs ODI cricket, and there should be a group that runs T20 cricket. Then we'll really see which one can stand and fall on their own. Maybe ODI cricket goes okay, maybe it doesn't. Right? Maybe you have 3rd-tier players playing in that. You have 2nd-tier players playing in Test cricket, and you have 1st-tier players in T20. Maybe you have a couple of players who choose Test cricket over T20 because there's now money in it, and that's their best format. I don't know, but that is what I would do. And then I would have a World Cup every 4 years, like a normal sport, right? And on top of that, you would have a Euros-style event. Whatever that may be, which is what the Champions Trophy was supposed to be, but they never quite got it right. And, it didn't really make sense because the World Cup was kind of similar amount of teams. But, you could have the top 8 teams every world in the other formats. But yeah, you probably for World Test Championship, I think every 2 years makes more sense. So you'd have a World Test Championship every 2 years, and maybe you call one of them the Test World Cup. Then you would have semi-finals and finals and those sorts of things, and you play the finals over 3 matches. Probably if you're saying, I had as much money as I wanted, I would play them in 3 different locations as well. Yeah, so that's what I would do. So that's drastically different. I would completely start again. I don't think the three formats. I don't think having three formats under one board particularly helps anyone. I'm not sure that women's cricket should be part of the men's board either. I think these things should be run for themselves, for the fan groups that love them. All right, let's take a quick break, and after the break, we'll be back with more questions here on Wagon Wheel. Thanks to the kind folks at FlexiSpot for looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like, and you can work. And their BS12 Pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, well, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights or the best quality chairs, head on over to FlexiSpot today. All right, welcome back. And let's get to, no one knows this question. I'm going to have to look this one up on my phone. It's way too long. And the problem is, if you ask a really long question, there's no way I'm going to be able to answer it correctly. Because it would take me 15 minutes to read it. I can't find where it was. Oh dear. Let's see, what's this one? Okay. Okay, this is okay. So I know what this one is basically. I have said for a long time that the most important all-rounders are the players who can bat in the top 7. And then therefore give you 5 bowlers and extend the bowling lineup. And he's saying that he thinks it's number 8. Here's why that is not the case. Number 8, if you're batting at number 8, you're probably just a weak batter, and so you're not adding all that much to the game. If you are a really good all-rounder, you can bat at number 7 or number 6. So number 7 is a bit of a swing position. It depends on how good your wicket-keeping batter is. But if you can bat at number 6, you automatically extend your team completely. That doesn't mean you won't still have bowlers who can be handy at number 8 or even number 9, right? But when you have a bowler who can bowl considerable deliveries and also bat in your top order, you change your lineup. But having someone who's handy at number 8 doesn't change your lineup. It just means that your batting is a little bit more extended, right? You're not actually improving the amount of options you have for your team. Right? What you are doing is hoping that, and here's what happens with number 8s. Everyone loves number 8s. Oh, look, Mitchell Starc and Pat Cummins, they both average around 20. They're really handy. They're handy to have. You prefer to have someone who can bat at number 8 and number 9 who can average around 20. That sort of, Shane Warne mark, right? When you are facing the world's best bowlers and the pitch is doing anything, a guy who averages 20 is fucking useless. Absolutely of no use to you whatsoever. Right? Because they are not proper batters. Someone who can bat at number 6 and is a genuine frontline bowling option is way more important. Way more important. If you're not losing anything with the batting and you then have extra availability, let's say it's Sobers, right? Sobers allowed for the West Indies to go into a lineup where they could play with 4 bowlers and extend their batting lineup in a different way. If they wanted to, they could have a specialist number 7 or a specialist number 8 batter, so you could still do what you want and have your extension. The difference is you could have a guy who averages 40 batting at number 7, and another guy who averages 40 batting at number 8 if you wanted to, because you have Sobers at number 6. So no, in every single way, the best all-rounder available to you is always going to be someone who gives you 5 frontline bowlers and you don't lose anything on batting. Anything else is a cheats all-rounder, right? It's a handy all-rounder. It's, Mark Waugh bowling you a few overs is not a genuine all-rounder, but he gives you a little bit of change-up. Paul Collingwood, those sorts of bowlers. That's fine and handy, and Joe Root does that job, and these things really, really help. But Joe Root doesn't give England the opportunity to be flexible with their lineup so that they can actually use him as the 4th bowler, right? When they tried to do that, they almost killed him as well. But it's just not something that Joe Root has the skills to be able to do. He can't land the ball in enough areas. So he doesn't allow them to be flexible with their lineup. Ben Stokes allowed them to be flexible with their lineup. Even Pete Moeen Ali allowed them to be flexible with their lineup. Because in that situation, what they could do is, if they wanted to, they can go in with 4 bowlers with Ben Stokes as the 4th bowler, right? Or they can do the same with Moeen Ali, or they can then have a team where they have Moeen Ali and Ben Stokes batting at, let's say, numbers 6 and 7, right? and then they could still have 4 bowlers behind them. That is the flexibility of a true all-rounder. And having someone who's a handy number 8. Richard Hadley played a couple of really good innings, and Shane Warne played a couple of really good innings. I'm not saying that those, Anil Kumble, that sort of level of player, is not handy, right? But have a look at how much more use Daniel Vettori was to New Zealand when he went from being a handy number 8 to being someone who could bat at number 6. It was light and day. What they could do, Ravi Jadeja going from a number 8 to a number 6 has changed what India can do. They can go in with a huge batting lineup in any game they want and have 4 bowlers. But it also gives them the ability to always use their bowlers when they're fresh. That is the key. It is tiring bowling in Test cricket. It is 20% longer than a first-class game. You need as many options as possible. You need different matchups. You need to use one bowler almost like a what are those big, a Clydesdale horse, right? In a 4-person lineup. You don't need to do that in a 5-person lineup. So no, in every single way, it is better to have an all-rounder who can bat in the top 6. That is the dream. That completely changes your side altogether. Bloody says, you have explained the reason why both conventional and reverse swing are less common in modern tests. But I was wondering if bowlers find it annoying, detrimental when they try to bowl wobble ball seam, but they also unintentionally get conventional reverse swing on the ball. No, it's something that they've all been working on. So teams are trying to do it. Well, Jimmy Anderson, I think Jimmy Anderson's the first guy I've seen who has worked out how to do both. But I did think that Jasprit Bumrah was occasionally trying to bowl wobble ball seam and was still getting some reverse. But I know that Anderson's been trying to get the ball to swing and also get a wobble ball, because that's the holy grail, right? Anyone who's ever faced a bowler who's done that, and sometimes it just happens by accident. I remember facing a guy once who was bowling these big outswingers, and then they would hit the pitch and just jag back in off the seam. And I remember facing about 3 balls, going down to a non-striker going, what am I supposed to do with this? Right? And this guy wasn't even particularly fast, but your whole body was moving like naturally with the swing, and suddenly it was coming back. It was like facing off spin, but at pace. And we've seen Ryan Harris do it occasionally. I'm trying to think of some of the other bowlers I've seen. That sort of perfect wrist position where it all works. It is almost impossible to be able to handle those sorts of things. So no, I do think that would be the next step if they can get that to work. But as I said, those are the only 2 guys I've seen who I think are getting that to happen. And it's a hugely hard skill. William says, I've already done that one. Ben says, what is it like going to a test match as press versus a fan spectator? Is it less enjoyable as you are conscious that you're working? Does it feel better knowing you are sort of behind the scenes? I'm not sure if being in the press feels like you're behind the scenes. No, it's completely different. If I'm going as a fan, I'm, thinking about when I'm going to get food and drink. I am probably trying to keep up with everything, but in the outer, you really, really struggle. You're in a lot more casual conversations, and I'm on my day off and I'm relaxing. If I'm working, I'm thinking about work. It's a day of it's that's my office, right, for that day. It's still enjoyable. It's a great office, Having worked in other offices, I'd certainly prefer that. But it's a job. So, all day I'm thinking of, what do I need to follow here? What's happening? Do I need to know more about this? All those sorts of basic level things. So it's a job. I mean, it's a really long job too. A test day for me, I'm trying to think, it's probably around 11 to 12 hours on a normal day. So that's not including any travel. So if I'm nowhere near the ground, add an extra half an hour to an hour each way. For that sort of thing. So it's really a full-on day. I quite often do writing and broadcasting. So, I'm on air calling the game, and then I go straight off and I have to think about what I might want to write or make a video of later or whatever that may be. And then, in the middle of that, try and find a chance to go and get some food and everything else. So it's quite a hectic sort of day. Does it feel better knowing you're behind the scenes? I suppose when I started, it did. That was where I wanted to be. I wanted, you have more access to information and conversations and, past players and other writers and broadcasters and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if it feels behind the scenes. Like, I don't feel any different. If I go to a game now and I'm not in the press box, I don't feel any different than I do there. But when you start, it feels like, I think there's a lot of young journalists who think like that being in the press box is your big break. And then you work out that it's just a bunch of people all working for different organizations trying to hit a deadline. And you getting accreditation and being in the press box doesn't actually change your career at all. But that's not how it probably feels early on. Roger says, could you give an explanation as to what the whole split was between KP and the England team and the ECB? I vaguely remember something about text to the South African team during the 2012 series, him wanting to retire from ODIs, but then not wanting him to, and them kicking him out. Okay. Yeah, there was always issues. So KP, when he played for Nottingham, I forget who it was now, but one of the Nottingham players threw his bag off the balcony. If you remember, there's like a little balcony that sort of sits up at Trent Bridge, like one over the other. So I think it's the home team, the away team. And they were so pissed off with him one day. That was before he played for England. KP is, and I've worked with him quite a bit now, as a commentator over the years. Not a bit, but 2 or 3 series at least. He's a peculiar guy. He's got a real way to him that is, what's the best way of putting it? There's like, he doesn't really understand things that are not, he doesn't really understand things that are not directly related to him. That's his worldview is very much, Kevin Peterson does this. And so, and that causes risks with other people. He was really, really arrogant and obviously was doing really well. And there was a bunch. This is when he went to the England team. I don't know the full Nottingham story. The England team, and I've had this told to me by them, they decided the best way to handle him was by bullying him. And the problem with that is he went from being the bully in many situations and saying things about players that the others didn't like to the guy who was being bullied. So then that brought about all sorts of rifts. And of course, he was then fighting back against the people. And there was a real cabal, obviously, of certain players. That bowling unit, that sort of Anderson, Broad, Swan, really had issues, I think, with KP at times. And they're all quite strong characters themselves. And it was toxic. It should have been, Andy Flower should have fixed it. I don't want to just throw Andy Flower because the ECB should have been involved with this as well. But this whole idea that they would just work it out, it was well beyond that quite early on. And I remember talking to someone from the ECB and they would tell me, oh, it's fine now. Every time KP says something stupid, someone just abuses him. And I was like, yeah, that's not a sustainable situation. And I think in the end, he felt like he was, he was not wanted in that change room, and he lashed out at them. There was the text messages that you're referring to are the ones he sent to Andrew Strauss. Sent to Mornay Morkel about Andrew Strauss, telling them how to bowl to him. That's how much it had all gone. There was also stuff about the IPL. Like, I think we all know that KP loves the IPL. Like, that isn't, I don't think whether he loves India or not, I don't know, but he loves the IPL. And, the fame that it gave him and the support that it gave him and the money that it gave him and all those things. And at that time, that's not how the rest of the England camp were looking. And they certainly weren't, the players back then weren't pushing to play in the IPL all that hard. They understood that, it was an awkward time of the year and everything. KP couldn't really see that. Again, there were some of the things that he said at that time that he was absolutely lambasted for would end up coming true, right? Like, that eventually the England players did go towards the money, and eventually English cricket did revitalize the way they played cricket. But there was lots of problems on and off the field with KP. They made him captain as well to try and placate him. And that was just, I don't think it suited his personality because, as I said before, he sees the world through KP lens, right? And, as a captain, you kind of need, there may be many great players who don't captain particularly well because they don't understand why other players fail. There's a great story, Brad Haddon's podcast the other day about Mark Waugh telling Brad Haddon to play a certain shot. I think it was like an inside-out cover drive against, I can't remember if it was an off-spinner or a left-arm finger spinner. And Brad Haddon's like, but I can't play that shot. And Mark was like, what are you talking about? Of course you can. You just come down the wicket and you do this. And then he showed him and he did it 2 or 3 times in a row. And Haddon's like, I don't have that ability. I'm not as good as you. And I think KP's that sort of player. And I've heard him talk to players before. And I've heard other star players do this as well. Just being like, why can't you do this? It's like, because why not you? And I think as a captain, you need to at least you need to understand that that is how players work. And so I just think there were many issues with it. I don't think anyone would be surprised to say that he can be a difficult person. But there are lots of difficult people in cricket, and they don't all end up in the same situation that KP did. So that's a group effort, right? And I don't think he was the right fit for that cricket culture, and all the way back to county cricket at that time. I really don't think he was the right fit for that. And weirdly enough, the kind of person KP is now is probably more a fit for that kind of culture. So things have changed. Let's have another quick ad break here on Wagon Wheel. And then after, back with more of your questions.
Ever wondered why slower deliveries work, what a zombie ball is, or how Sunil Gavaskar would have batted in T20? Well, we have the channel for you, Good Areas. Twice a week, we have a new deep dive into a great story from cricket on our main channel, Good Areas. It is the history and present of cricket as narrated by me. If you make any content, Memento is the tool for you. Take your long format pods and meetings and anything you have and let Memento cut and slice it up for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try memento.fm today.
All right. Ruger says, are there any submarine bowlers, like submarine pitches in baseball, that is not underarm but maybe round arm with the torso bent over so that the release point is nearer the ground? Yeah. So you can't have your arm under your shoulder, right? So you can have it level with your shoulder, but you couldn't be a submarine bowler in the same way that baseball has it. I suppose you could lower your entire body so your shoulder is quite low, and we have seen spin bowlers try that before, but you can't get any lower than that. The difference is probably the bounce, right? Because if you get too low, it's just going to roll on the ground, and then no one will be able to hit you for six, and it wouldn't be. We'd have people come in scuttling in and bowling really low. Certainly in certain situations, and ask Trevor Chappell how that went. Oh, and I should say we did originally have bowlers like this in Test cricket. In international cricket. Start again. In first class cricket and county cricket, that is where cricket started, but has obviously evolved beyond that. Ben says Australian cricketers have the best union association, but they are also the best paid. I think it tests anyway. I think percentage wise, I think you're right. How much would all players and member nations being in some form of union change the game? It would be huge, to get that. And I think it's mostly the Asian sides who are not in the union. I know I did a podcast with them recently, but I've now forgotten the details. But I think that's the case. Look, it would be huge for domestic cricket right across the board to be in a union to look after. New Zealand cricket changed forever, essentially, because the players went on strike from domestic cricket. And that was it. I'm not even sure if the union was around then, although it might have been. I don't know if Heath Mills was around with the union at that stage. But it was players organising and going, this is ridiculous. We are professional athletes. We're expected to be professional athletes, and we're not getting paid and we're not getting looked after. And so that changed New Zealand cricket, really. That was a huge shot in the arm to the New Zealand game. If there's no real situations where unions, don't help the collective, right? And you can make claims that unions get corrupted and they end up, as de facto political parties and all those sorts of things. I think that's all fair, but there is no part of where, every time I've ever dealt with the cricket union, I've thought I'm really glad that cricket union exists. It's helping past players and working on rights, and look at what women's cricket had because of the strong union in Australia. And one of the reasons that I think Australia was more dominant was on the back of having better facilities and pay for their domestic cricketers. And that came from the unions, right? Like there's a bit of a myth within Australian cricket that Kerry Packer changed everything for players, and he's the reason that they all got paid a lot more money. And he paid them a lot more money. But when he got the rights, they went back to being paid crap again. It was the unionization sort of through Tim May, who had obviously been inspired by what Ian Chappell had done in the 70s, that really changed everything, right? And now, with the way that cricket is at the moment, we need unions more than any ever before because of franchise cricket. And it's a big issue not having all the players involved in it. And cricketers would make more money if every major cricket board, every major cricket team, the players were in unions. That's just a fact. There would just be more money for all the players, and it would be a better run sport. And not to say that the unions wouldn't then cause other issues, because they would. There would be other issues off the back of that, but there's just absolutely no doubt. As someone who is still owed money by cricket leagues around the world, like, there is absolutely, without any doubt, the fact that there isn't a proper unionization of cricket off-field workers and cricket players is a huge issue for our sport. Oh, another huge one. Adityan says, enjoyed the episode on late-stage franchise cricket. Do you think it would be in the ICC's best interest to auction off windows to host major T20 leagues? The ICC wouldn't be able to do that. And the reason why it wouldn't work is because the ICC has nothing to do with windows. And the reason why that is, the boards don't want the ICC to do what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, it would be better, but there is no way that would ever happen. Just because they would never cede that importance. They don't want the ICC running the leagues. So the method that you're talking about here would be another situation where that would happen. There are many differences. As I've said before, if the ICC was a real board, you would go to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Oman, Bangladesh, and just say, just have a mega league. It would be cooler anyway, right? So there are many different things that they could do, but they have nothing to do with that. Ubik says, who is the best men's player who currently plays for an associate nation? Who would be called up to the most full member nations right now? I suppose Baz the leader might be the one at the moment that you would pick. And then, Van Meekeren would probably be up there as well. I'm trying to think of someone else. Ali Khan's probably slipped off a little bit, hasn't he? Trying to just probably no one in Kenya or Papua New Guinea. I suppose, and David Visa, would he be another one that you would be thinking of? I don't think there's really all that many others. I mean, there's a few Dutch bowlers, to be fair. But yeah, I think those are the main ones off the top of my head that would make the most sense. I think if I'm forgetting another associate, I mean, George Munsey at his peak maybe, but it's probably not there as again. And maybe Callum McLeod at his peak as well. Those two players have had incredible peaks when they've been really good. And Mark Watt, maybe. Actually, I'll go a couple from Scotland. But maybe Mark Watt is the other one, actually, more so than Munsey and McLeod. But yeah, I'm trying to think if I'm missing anyone else. Probably missing someone obvious from another associate team. Oh, I'm trying to think of some of the UAE batters have come through. But anyway, where are we? Ubik says, I've recently been able to get my hands on ball-by-ball data for my indoor cricket team. Oh my God. Respect, or not even respect, but good, well done. What do you think would be the most interesting stats to look up? So I always had this thing in indoor cricket, and it depends on if you play 6-team or 8-team indoor cricket and what the shape of the court is and everything else. But my thought process always was that the best shot in indoor cricket was either hitting to mid-wicket or hitting to mid-on, or hitting to sort of cover or extra cover, because you have the ability to hit the side net and then the back net. And in the competitions I played in, you would get 2 runs for the side net and then an extra run or 2, whatever it was, for hitting the back, plus you could run. It also made it really hard for run-outs, and most people who go for the back nets. So I'd be interested to see if the players who hit the most 4s and 6s actually have more dismissals in indoor cricket, because you can be caught trying to hit those shots a lot more, and also the run out opportunities, because the ball is actually bouncing directly back towards the stumps. That would be a fascinating one to be able to try and work out, but it does depend, because indoor cricket has slightly different rules in slightly different places. But that was always my thing of just all I really need to be able to do is hit to, I learned to on drive through indoor cricket just because it was such a profitable shot. And then, and then the cover drive and the on drive were the 2 best shots. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the ball-by-ball data that you'd be interested in there. The other thing is that I think wicket keepers naturally come up to the stumps in indoor cricket. I don't know if they mark buys. Actually, maybe they don't mark buys. That wouldn't help you. But I'd be interested to know if there are just certain bowlers that you shouldn't have the wicket keeper up to the stumps for. There's just no point. And because there isn't enough gap to go back, but there's enough gap to actually stand, a meter or two back and take the ball off the net. There are other ways of wicket keeping. But yeah, those are the ones off the top of my head. Swami Nathan says, how will Bazball be perceived if Cummins was caught and the Ashes has a scoreline of 3-1, and if Pope was caught and India versus England has a scoreline of 5-0? Well, they would have beaten the World Test champions, so it would have been seen as pretty good from that. And then I think everyone thought that if Bazball was no one outside of like 8 people from the England staff thought that Bazball was going to particularly work in India. We thought maybe there would be periods where it would work, which is kind of how it did work, if I'm being honest. But no one thought it was going to work all that much. So I think losing 5-0, I think it would probably be thought of as slightly higher because that was the more expected one. Whereas if England had beaten Australia 3-1, I think considering Australia just won the World Test Championship and Australia had drawn in that previous series, I think Bazball would have been thought of as slightly higher. Based on those conditions you put in. Christopher says, if you could pick one non-IPL T20 side in history to compete in the IPL, who would it be and how would they get on? Oh, you just go back and you pick one of the early Victoria New South Wales teams, wouldn't you? What? Dirk Nannes, Cameron White, Aaron Finch, Glenn Maxwell, Shane Harwood. I'm trying to think if was Harwood still around then. That would be the Victorian team, and what would New South Wales be? Actually, it's just before probably head start. Hazelwood. So you would have what? McGrath. Did McGrath and Stark overlap? New South Wales? Oh, maybe not. But yeah, some of those early sides of you would have what? Bracken, McGrath. Haddon. Who's some of the other batters? Young Steve Smith, when he was a T20 player. Those are the obvious ones. Trying to think. I don't think any of the county. I think there was a team in county cricket once that we thought would have been interesting if they'd gone into the IPL, and I cannot remember who it was now. But I remember having this conversation with someone once. Where would they come if they went in the IPL? Trying to think of some of the great CPL teams. There must be a Trinbago team, and certainly the old Trinidad teams would have been quite interesting, as we saw in the Champions League. I'm trying to think if there's any. I would have to go through some of the old South African lineups. But those are the ones. I mean, realistically, we saw that the IPL teams didn't dominate the Champions League when it existed, right? I'm trying to remember. Was it Cricket Champion League? How many years did it even go for? Champions League T20. So there were... God, did it finish as late as 2014? I didn't realize it went that long. Okay. So Trinidad won. So the Wanderers won. Then... Oh, no, wait, I'm looking at the runners-up. I'll start again. New South Wales beat Trinidad. So those were 2 really good teams. CSK beat the Warriors. So they were quite a good team. Then you've got Mumbai beat Bangalore. And then you had the Sydney Sixers in 2012. And they beat the Highveld Lions. Next year was all IPL final. And the final year was... So it was already starting to... Because the teams were being split up. And also, I remember... Victoria sent over an incredible team, but most of the best Victorian players didn't play in it because they were playing for their other sides. So once those things start to get split up a little bit more, things went away. I'm just trying to see if I can find a Sydney Sixers just to see, because once those teams, here we go. So you had my God, what a game from Moses Enriquez there. But dominating with the bat and ball against Chennai. So you had Michael Lum, Shane Watson, Nick Maddinson, Brad Haddon, Steve Smith, Moses Enriquez, Ben Rora, Steve O'Keefe, Pat Cummins, Mitchell Stark, Josh Hazelwood. It's a pretty good team, right? So yeah, I think there were probably some side. What? Who's your spinner there? Probably you want to get a spinner into that side, right? Is that? I'm just trying to have a look. So you got Steve O'Keefe. He actually wasn't a bad spinner at that point, if we're being honest. Yeah. So yeah, there are certainly sides that would have done quite well, I think, had they played in that tournament more. So there's certainly something to be said for that league going on, but it became ridiculous when Karen Pollard and Dirk Nannes were qualifying for 4 teams at once, right? Dan Christian was qualifying for every single team in every single league if they would have continued that tournament. So that's why it disappeared. But yeah, there were certainly other sides at times that would have done fine with that. But the more that it was split up, the more you sort of break these things up, the more things sort of become harder to be a good team. And then do you get your best players? Let's take a quick break, and then after the break, we'll come back with more on the Wagon Wheel.
Support us on Patreon and help us keep making our content. Join for exclusive perks like the AMAs, the live calls, and to chat with me directly on Discord. You can also enjoy ad-free content, early podcasts, and access to my emailer. Step up your cricket-style game with Bodyline t-shirts. Explore their exclusive player-themed t-shirts, including favorites like Virat Kohli, Kane Williamson, and Ben Stokes. They also have team-inspired designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds. Their collection offers something unique for every fan.
All right, welcome back. Satchmo says, do you agree with George Dobell that 5-test series are on the way out? Didn't Australia and India just decide they were going to play them all the time? So, I mean, they're not on their way out, but I can't imagine anyone outside of India, Australia, England, Australia, those 3 teams playing each other, we're not going to see 5-test series. To fit in some of these leagues, they're going to have to change things around as well. Not as much of a problem for India, but can be a problem. Will be more of a problem for Australia if they ever want their main players to play in their Big Bash. And obviously the 100 makes 5-test series really, really difficult as well. But yeah, my memory is that India and Australia just decided they were going to play each other in 5-test series going forward, unless I'm misremembering that and it was something else. But other teams have already stopped playing them. So, I mean, they were already on their way out. Ali says, I've often heard that T20s will make associate nations more competitive in general, but would the absence of proper first-class cricket hurt their progression in terms of their player skills? And if so, what incentives are there for associate nations to invest first-class structure? Yeah, I mean, T20 will bring in professionalism, right? Your players are still working on their core skills with coaches and everything else. And there's more money available for that. So I think in that basic way, it makes a lot more sense to be able to do that. But yes, there is, first-class cricket. Multi-day cricket tests you in different ways and makes you develop probably more sound career path. But there's going to be a lot of players in the world that aren't going to spend a lot of time being able to do that. So yes, it is. I think it's an issue, and you're right. But at the same time, I just don't think they have the money, some of these nations, to be able to do things twice. I remember when I was in Scotland, their whole thing was, let's get as good as we can at white ball cricket. And was their pathway to eventually get test status? Yeah, still probably was. But they were like, we can only afford to put money on one side of the ball, right? And so, you pick your poison. Well, maybe that's not poison. Maybe that's the wrong way of doing it. Oh, we've already done that one from Adityan. Ian says, niche question. But what do you know about Bev Congdon? He was New Zealand's highest run scorer in Test cricket for quite a long time until Martin Crowe. He also took a few wickets, but he's relatively unknown. Yeah, he is. It's an interesting one. He's, when you talk to people in New Zealand, there's a lot of respect for him as a player. But it's, like the old John Reid, the first John Reid. There isn't as he doesn't get remembered like Bert Sutcliffe or John Reid or those sorts of players. And then that sort of next generation of players of Glenn Turner and Martin Crowe and Richard Hadley, and even guys like Jeremy Coney and John Wright, they all kind of have a bigger say. He didn't go on to stay in cricket, and I know we've talked about this before. I think we talked about this in the Wasm Akram episode. Like, these sorts of things are really quite important. Like, if you need to stick around and talk and continue. The other thing was that I think Bev Congdon was just seen as like a guy who played a lot of cricket and tried very hard, but wasn't a world beater in any particular skill. So he ends up averaging, 32. Incredibly average, 30, almost 34 away from home and only 31 at home. But it's a really long career. So I'm just having a look at his record now. He starts in 65 and ends in 78. That's quite long for a New Zealand career, because a lot of those players didn't play as many games because they were amateur. So I think he was just seen as a bit of a mainstay, but like no one ever saw him as a star player or anything else. But a lot of those other players were either better or stayed around in cricket. Like someone like John Wright becomes a coach, and Jeremy Coney becomes a commentator. Maybe that whole side of things didn't really help with Congdon as much. But yeah, he was a good cricketer for a struggling team who was becoming good. You need players like that. Think about him, some of those early Bangladeshi batters, some of those, that sort of Roy Dias type player, right? I think Roy Dias was better, and obviously a lot earlier in Sri Lanka's development, but that's the sort of player that you're talking about. Swami Nathan says, with the time limits of enforcement between overs, does it make sense to bring back Cronier's Woolmer-style earpieces to communicate tactics? I don't think those two things are related, because players don't need to talk about tactics as much as they do. There doesn't need to be a 3-minute conversation. Part of the genius of cricket is being able to make decisions quickly, right? But separate to that, I think that we talked about this the other day when Azam Mahmood talked about it. There's still an argument that, I always look at these things. Would this make cricket better? And I think it would, right? I do think it would actually improve the quality of cricket. And if you watch me on TalkSport, have a look at when I'm frustrated, right? It's never about one team, supporting one team or the other. It is almost always shit cricket that annoys me, right? Well, it might be a fielding error. It might be, a bad shot choice, or, a bad bowling plan, or whatever it may be. But that's what frustrates me. I just want the cricket to be at the highest quality as possible. And if this is a theory that does that, I'm open for it. I'm kind of surprised that no one's tried it, being that we've been miking players up for quite some time now. Swami Nathan says, if you're a poor kid, does being in India give you a better chance of becoming a pro cricketer? I see a lot of English and South African cricketers have posh private school backgrounds, in contrast with Siraj, Rinku, Jaiswal. Well, traditionally, that's not the case, though, is it? That's a new thing in India, because cricket has kind of been opened up. The problem with New Zealand, you could almost throw Sri Lanka in here as well. New Zealand, Sri Lanka, South Africa, England, even some of the associate teams like Scotland, is that cricket is kind of fenced off and is really a private school sport in many of those places. Not everywhere. Like if you look at England, there are certainly parts of England that it's not like that. Up north, certainly not like that. But there are other parts of England where it is really like that. And so it is an issue. But that was also an issue for Pakistan teams and Indian teams. And, it's the way that cricket was spread. And it's also about resources. So we did a whole episode about how hard it is to become a batter. I should say why there aren't as many young black batters from South Africa as there are bowlers. And it's because you can just run in and bowl and your athleticism will do the job. But to be a batter, you need to play on good conditions. You need the ability to have pads and everything else. So you're much more, so we see a lot of these bowlers, these sort of Siraj, Bumrah, Haris Ralph, tons of the Sri Lankan guys, right, who haven't touched a cricket ball. Well, Zamakra might have been another one. They don't touch a cricket ball when they're young. And at 17, 18, it doesn't matter, because their athleticism and their pace or their ability to move the ball is so great that they end up in first-class cricket and test cricket almost straight away. I don't know of cases where people have been great at playing tennis ball cricket with the bat and haven't had the ability to play against a cricket ball and just as good. Like, I don't know of any situations where that has happened yet. I don't know if that will always remain the case, but it does mean that there is an issue there. So I think that's a part of it. But a lot of this is societal in these different places, as I said. And, cricket isn't, I mean, there's a great book by Duncan Stone all about all this, if you want to know about the English one. And a lot of cricket around the world followed the English model. I think one of Australia's big advantages in cricket was the ability to break free of that. And the West Indies had the same thing when it went from a white sport with a few black players to, an Asian and black sport. They broke free of that as well. And that allows you to pick from more players. And once you can pick from more players, you're going to be better off. Aditya says, there will be an IPL Mega Auction next year. Don't you think the IPL should do away with the Mega Auction now and let teams settle more and allow for fans to support and cheer a set of players over a period of time? I like the Mega Auction from a, nerdish point of view. And, as you probably notice, I don't deal as much with the smaller auctions as I do the Mega Auctions. So from that point of view, I kind of like it. But I get your point, and I get asked this quite a lot. Yeah, I think at a certain point, you just have to admit that you're in. And then if you bring in new franchises, you bring in a mega auction, or you have a different system that allows, teams to poach players from the new franchises to poach players on deals or whatever that may be. And you can hide your best 4 players or 6 players or whatever you want to do. So I think that's a better option. And I don't think we need to keep mega auctioning. But I would assume, for the same reason that a draft would make more sense than a mega auction at this point, it should be free agency and draft, because I think that's a much better system than the auction. But the reason we don't have that is largely because I think they love the auction, and the auction works for them, and a mega auction probably works better for them, would be my guess. So I can see why they're going to continue to do that. All right, that's everything from Patreon. And let me just see. I think we've got some super chats coming in as well. ABCD says, how will Saudi approach cricket like football or golf? So originally, and I got this, I was tipped off of this a long way out, that I think Saudi were going to do a very similar thing with cricket that they did with golf. And then with the golf kind of went against them in a PR sense, and they kind of changed their method. I think they decided that they wanted something different. So I think they would try and partner up with the BCCI, IPL, that kind of group to do stuff there directly. But they are going to want a major competition in Saudi Arabia. I think that's pretty certain. And they've certainly got the money to be able to do that. I think that's the way that they're going to go with that at the moment, which is a partnering thing, which is slightly different than the football or the golf method, I suppose. Rupesh says, I couldn't find your cave bit in your podcast with Barham. No, I think we just didn't get to it. We got a bunch of super chats in the middle, and so we never really got to that particular story. I'm trying to remember. I can't even remember what the cave one was that we were going to be doing. Let me just quickly look it up, because he had that on the thing. Oh, he was talking about the pitches, wasn't he? Yeah, I mean, that wasn't anything that we don't know. I think, there's been conversations that the pitches were that were changed. I wasn't over there, but it seemed fairly full. It seemed to be the case. As I've said before, when you doctor pitches, especially when you doctor pitches late, things don't always go your way. And the other problem is when you make a pitch, like that, if someone is trying to doctor the pitch and make it go against type or make a late change to it, things can go wrong. And if you make a pitch that is too dependent on the toss, all these things can go wrong. I think people always think that every time you doctor pitches, you win. I had a TikTok comment the other day when we did the biggest scoundrels in cricket on CricPix. And someone said Indian curators. I'm like, Indian curators aren't even anywhere near the biggest pitch doctors in the world. As I've been saying for ages, South Africans way more over the top than that. And for a long time, Indian curators would do whatever they wanted, regardless of what the team asked for. So I think that was a big issue. But yes, once you start to doctor pitches, especially late, I think you bring in variables, and it doesn't work the way that people always think it will. And I still think India was the best team in that World Cup. And I'm not saying that particular pitch in the end didn't help them, but I just think you're thinking about it wrong. If that's where you're starting, you're thinking about it wrong. And especially if you're making late decisions. I really do think it doesn't work. ABCD, Shastri was treated as a bit of a joke for most of his coaching stint with India. My respect for him increased a lot post Border Gavaskar Trophy in 2021. What are your thoughts about him and also drafted as coaches? I think because, and quite rightly, we've now seen Brian Lara come in. I don't think Shastri is a bad coach. I actually like the way he thinks about cricket. I disagree with him on some things, but I do like the way he thinks about cricket. But I don't like people just getting yanked out of TV to coach. I think I think it misunderstands what coaching is. And so I do have some issues with that. Look, I think he had a really good team and he did okay with them, but he had the same problem that I suppose Dravid did. This is the best team in cricket over a long period of time now, and there's no trophies, right? Like at a certain point, that's how people are remembering them. Segar says, what was your favorite TV show and movie? Oh my God. Even favorite genre. Look, obviously, that is such a hard thing. I think if you want to know my all-time favorite movie, it is probably Doctor Strangelove. I think that's probably right. I would certainly have that very, very high up. Anyway, I love science fiction in general. More so movies, although when I was a kid, I read a lot of science fiction books as well. But more so movies when I was a kid. But even then, I probably prefer apocalyptic science fiction. So, a niche within a niche. So I suppose it's a TV show. I think The Shield was probably my favorite TV show. Maybe when The Wire came out, maybe that slightly went past it, but it would be The Shield or The Wire. I thought were absolutely brilliant. And I used to love Deadwood as well. And Duckman and BoJack Horseman would probably be quite high up on my list as well. But yeah, it's a really hard question for me to answer. Mostly because I was not expecting it, Sega. Shrikant says, in my honest opinion, 95.14 is better than 99.94. Don Bradman's first class record is underrated relative to his test record. Yeah, I think you're right. Especially if you think that Australia were the best team, and like there are many people that would argue that playing in Shield cricket at that time was really, really hard. So I think that's fair. And also the wickets, right? He would have played on, especially in England, a lot of 2 and 3 day wickets. I don't know if they played 2-day first class cricket on some of those 2 games, but certainly 3-day games, which would have been juiced up wickets at times, right? As well. So no, I agree. It's the same with Hobbs. When we've been looking at the greatest test batter of all time, we really are looking at the first class records of some players when it matters, right? And I do think in the case of Bradman and Hobbs, it's a very, very big part of it, and it also helps you with players like Pollock and Headley and those sorts of players. And there are other players who had really good test records, but don't have the first class records to match them up, and that does make you question whether they just had their best form, Dawood Malan type situations. Saurabh Javari Music says, I've read your book on Test cricket twice now. It ends at the Adelaide Oval. Any chance we get a part 2 in the near future? Yeah, it ends at the Phil Hughes Test match after Phil Hughes had passed away. I'm doing another book on the history of Test cricket at the moment. So I'm doing 2 books at the moment. One is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire, which should be out in a few months. That is on the first time that teams beat England in major cricket games. And then the other book is called The Art of Batting. And that is obviously about the 50 greatest batters and why they're great and stories about batting and all these sorts of things. I'm not going to do a part 2 on the modern future of Test cricket. Like I did Test cricket from, the beginning of Test cricket all the way up till, 2014-ish? I'm not about to go back and do the last 10 years or anything. I might do something on modern Test cricket one day, but I'm not massively, I don't have an idea at the moment. I've pretty much got my next 3 or 4 books in my mind already, and that's not one of them. Shrikant says, is boycott, and also, thank you for buying my book. I don't know if it's still in print. Shrikant says, is boycott most underrated bat in the last 80 years? Average 56 in county cricket versus very, very high in the 60s and 70s. Didn't bat on as many featherbeds as Sunil Gavaskar in tests. Yeah, I think because of who he is, because of how he played, he's been brought down. I still think Gavaskar was better. Gavaskar might be the greatest player of spin that's ever existed, right? I really do truly believe that, having gone through his record. I think Boycott was fantastic, but I do think being Boycott has caused him some problems. But yeah, I think Boycott's probably still top 25 of all time. And had to open. He has an average of 56 in county cricket. Also has a very high average in Test cricket, despite the fact he spent a lot of his time opening in England, right? I think he was an absolutely fantastic player. But yeah, he rubbed people up the wrong way. Please discuss Australia's Test team's succession plan. So I don't know if you can have a succession plan for international sport, right? If you're a franchise, you can. Because you're like, okay, so this player's aging out, so we need to find the next player will come in. In Test cricket, specifically, the players are available. Yes, you can work on them a little bit more, but like you can't make someone into the next Steve Smith, right? Like that's just how it's going to be. I think the future of Australian cricket is quite interesting because of Hardy, Green, and Will Sutherland might all be potential all-rounders, but they also all basically do a similar thing. So that the succession plan might be that it's a more all-rounder driven team, and you might have Green batting at 6, Green batting at 4, Hardy batting at 6, Sutherland batting at 8, and then topping up with 3 other bowlers around them. But that's 3 right-arm seamers, so I don't know if that even works the way that they would want it to work. But yeah, I wouldn't really, I couldn't give you a clear path there. I think batting is an issue. I think, seam bowling seems, they always seem to find seam bowlers, so I'm less worried about that. But frontline batting does seem a little bit more of an issue, especially with someone like Pekoski, who by this stage, they would have liked to have played 30 tests and be averaging 44. Ekant says, why did the Australian team not stop being pricks after Phil Hughes' death? Did they really need the sandpaper wake-up call to build a better culture? Why did they? They had periods where they did, and they had periods where they didn't. I think they started losing some games, and then they were told to find the mongrel. So I think Warner was told to sledge more specifically by the Australian camp because they wanted that attitude. Matty Wade was brought in at one stage because they wanted more sledging and stuff. Like they went for that. But I don't know why the Phil Hughes death would have anything to do with that. That's a kind of a completely different situation. I would have thought. I don't see your direct link between those two things. But yeah, the sandpaper thing was a chance. But I also just think the culture was changing in general. There was still when Inverarity was in charge, there was this real sort of push towards, we're giving cricket to the nerds, right? And so, that then Langer and Lehman sort of come in off the back of that kind of stuff. And then the nerds kind of took over. Pat Cummins is a bit of a nerd, right? Like George Bailey Bales, but a bit of a nerd. These guys do think and are slightly different and, are different kinds of people. So I do think there was a change there. But I think that was less I think sandpaper maybe was the hinge point. But I really think the difference was that these players are different. Have a look at Stoinis and Zampa, and it's a completely different generation. Australia is a different country than it was in the 80s and 90s. Asking because of your passing comment from yesterday's show, what are your VJ Malia stories? So I was the general manager of St. Lucia, and I spent a lot of time on phone calls, and I've also got Sid Malia stories and VJ Malia stories, and but I'll use them one day. There's no hurry. All these things will come out. VK says, last question. Used to love the Asia versus Africa matches back in the day. If we were to pick Asia versus rest of the world test for the Gabba, who would win? The Asian team just has so many better teams to pick from, right? I mean, you could almost just pick the Indian side and you would struggle. There's no good batting in the African continent at the moment. Asif Karim's son from Kenya might get a go. ahead of some of them. So yeah, the Asian team would absolutely slaughter them. Karun and Ratney, you might move like Jaiswal to 3, right? And then who else would you bring in? If Shaheen was fully fit, you'd bring in the left arm pace. Trying to think if there's any others. Is anyone from Shakib's probably not quite at his best. Yeah, you wouldn't have to really improve on the Indian side all that much, but you could. The South African team's not very good. And so all you've got to pick from is David Visa in Namibia and Zimbabwe, right? And there's not much left of Kenya. And I don't know how many 4-day, 5-day players from Uganda there are out there. So, it wouldn't be pretty, I don't think, that matchup anymore. It's different back in the days when Zimbabwe were a really, really good team. It was probably still always weighted towards Asia, of course, but when South Africa were, first or second best team in the world, and Zimbabwe were really good, in the 8th or 9th best team in the world, you had a lot to deal with. I don't think that's a fair fight, that one, anymore. Anyway, that's the end of Wagon Wheel. As I said before, if you like what we do, go over to goodareas.co. And there you can find all the written work that we do with all the graphics and everything else. We've got a piece on the WPL coming up. We've got a piece on the IPL coming up. We did a really interesting one on the World Test Championship last week on the main channel. So there's a bunch of stuff on the main channel. And heaps of other stuff out there as well. A big thanks to everyone for coming into the chat and everything else. Oh, wait, VK's come in. Oh, I meant rest of the world. Okay, but you said Asia versus Africa. They did do rest of the world once. Rest of the world. Well, you had Australia, New Zealand, West Indies players. I think that's still slightly better than Asia, but I'd have to go through it man by man. It would be that's not an easy question to do at the end of a podcast. But thank you for your super chats, VK. And go over to goodareas.co, patreon.com/Jarrod Kimber. Listen to the podcasts, watch my face, go on the main channel. And also Cricket 8. I'll be working with Cricket 8 during the IPL. We'll be doing live watch-alongs for the first 5 games, and then probably for the weekends afterwards. We've got Stuart Meeker and Rob Barron. If you don't know who Rob Barron is, I don't know how I haven't had him on the podcast yet. Probably because I hate him as a person. But Rob Barron is an absolute genius, and I'll be working with him all the way through the IPL as well. Be lots of fun. So if you can pop over for some of those, we'll be doing scoreboards for the IPL. At this stage, we'll be doing Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday scoreboards. We won't be able to do every day of the week, I don't think, unless we get a major sponsor or something changes. But we'll certainly have quite a few scoreboards, and then we'll have 2 or 3 videos a week. Power lists will be back, things like that on the main channel. But thank you very much, and I will see you again very, very soon here on Good Areas Live.
NordVPN know nothing about knuckleballs, but they can help you with online safety. If you need a VPN, use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount and 4 months for free. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, which is risk-free. The link is in the show notes. So stop thinking about knuckleballs for 2 minutes and go to nordvpn.com/Kimber and get your deal. A few years ago, I tried to work out what my process was for actually making content on sport. And along the way, I realized that I had basically created an online course. So here it is, Fans with Laptops, a course you can do in your own time. And it looks at writing, podcasting, and making videos, not to mention social media and so many other parts of the industry. I will teach you about what to do inside the press box or writing a huge feature. But the important thing is that it takes your passion and lets you make something out of it. So